Lady Isabella Ashworth pressed her back against the rough stone wall of the servants' corridor, her heart hammering in her chest. The Duke of Ravenshollow's deep voice echoed from his study just beyond the door. She clutched the stolen clothes tighter against her body. Tomorrow she would no longer be Isabella. Tomorrow she would become Isaac, a young man seeking work at the Duke's estate. It was her only escape from the arranged marriage her father had planned with the cruel Lord Blackthorne. "You cannot hide forever, Isabella," her father's voice rang through the manor halls. She squeezed her eyes shut. Lord Ashworth had returned from London with news that made her stomach turn. The wedding would happen in 1 week. 7 days to become someone else entirely. Isabella had practiced walking like a boy for months in secret. She deepened her voice and bound her chest with strips of cloth. Her golden hair would have to go, cut short and messy like a stable boy's. The plan had to work. Lord Blackthorne was known for his cruelty to servants and his 3 wives, who had all died under mysterious circumstances. The next morning, Isabella stood at the servants' entrance of Ravenshollow Estate. She had cut her hair in the dark hours before dawn, leaving golden strands scattered across her bedroom floor like autumn leaves. The rough wool clothes hung loose on her slender frame. Dirt smudged her cheeks and hands. She looked exactly like a young man desperate for work. "State your business," the head butler said, looking down his long nose at her. "I'm Isaac Miller, sir," Isabella said, keeping her voice low and steady. "I heard His Grace might need another stable hand." The butler's eyes swept over her from head to toe. "You look barely old enough to lift a saddle." "I'm stronger than I look, sir. I've worked horses since I was small." This was not entirely a lie. Isabella had spent countless hours in her father's stables, much to his displeasure. Ladies were not supposed to know how to saddle horses or muck out stalls, but Isabella had always preferred the company of animals to the stuffy drawing rooms where proper ladies spent their time. The butler sighed. "Very well, follow me. His Grace will decide if you're worth keeping." Isabella's pulse quickened as they walked through the grand hallways of Ravenshollow Estate. Portraits of stern-faced ancestors lined the walls, their painted eyes seeming to follow her every step. Crystal chandeliers caught the morning light and scattered rainbows across the marble floors. This was a place of power and wealth, so different from her family's crumbling manor. They stopped outside a set of massive oak doors carved with the Ravenshollow family crest. The butler knocked twice. "Enter," came the deep voice. Isabella had heard the night before. The Duke of Ravenshollow sat behind an enormous desk, his dark hair perfectly styled despite the early hour. His blue eyes were the color of a winter storm, sharp and intelligent. He wore a simple white shirt and dark jacket, but even in casual clothes he commanded attention. Isabella had seen him from a distance at social gatherings, but up close his presence was overwhelming. "Your Grace," the butler said with a bow. "This young man seeks employment in the stables." The Duke's gaze fixed on Isabella, and she felt as if he could see straight through her disguise. His eyes lingered on her face for a long moment before traveling down to her hands. Isabella fought the urge to hide them behind her back. Despite her efforts to rough them up, they were still too soft, too clean for a boy who had worked hard labor his entire life. "What is your name?" the Duke asked. "Isaac Miller, Your Grace." Isabella kept her voice steady and low. "Where do you come from, Isaac Miller?" Isabella had prepared for this question. "A small village north of here, Your Grace. My family lost their farm, and I need work to eat." The Duke leaned back in his chair, still studying her with those piercing blue eyes. "You have experience with horses?" "Yes, Your Grace. I can ride, groom, and tend to their needs." "Can you read and write?" Isabella hesitated. Most stable boys could not read or write, but she had forgotten to consider this. A little, Your Grace. The village priest taught me some letters. The Duke nodded slowly. I see. Tell me, Isaac, what would you do if you discovered someone was lying to you? Isabella's heart nearly stopped. Did he know? Was this a trap? She forced herself to meet his gaze. I suppose it would depend on why they were lying, Your Grace. Sometimes people lie because they have no other choice. A small smile played at the corners of the Duke's mouth. An interesting answer. Very well, Isaac Miller. You may work in my stables. Report to Thomas, the head groom. He will show you your duties and where you will sleep. Thank you, Your Grace. Isabella bowed as she had practiced, trying to mimic the awkward way young men moved. One more thing, Isaac. The Duke's voice stopped her at the door. I value honesty above all else. If you ever wish to tell me the truth about anything, my door is always open. Isabella's cheeks burned, but she nodded and followed the butler out of the room. Had the Duke seen through her disguise already, or was he simply the type of man who gave such advice to all his servants? The stables at Raven's Hollow Estate were magnificent. Dozens of horses filled the stalls, from massive war horses to delicate mares bred for racing. The smell of hay and leather filled the air. Along with the soft sounds of horses moving in their stalls, Isabella felt more at home here than she had in any drawing room. Thomas, the head groom, was a weathered man with kind eyes and calloused hands. He looked Isabella up and down with a critical eye. His Grace says you know horses. We'll see about that. Can you muck a stall? Yes, sir. Can you lift a saddle? Yes, sir. Can you keep your mouth shut about what you see and hear around the estate? Isabella nodded firmly. Yes, sir. Thomas handed her a pitchfork and pointed to a stall at the end of the row. Start there. If you do good work, you'll eat well and have a warm place to sleep. If you don't, you'll be on the road by sunset. Isabella threw herself into the work with determination. She mucked stalls, hauled water, and groomed horses until her arms ached. The other stable boys were friendly enough, though they seemed curious about the new arrival, who spoke better than most farm boys. Isabella was careful to keep her voice low and her movements masculine. She had studied her father's stable hands for months, learning how they walked, how they held their shoulders, how they spat in the dirt and wiped their noses on their sleeves. By evening, Isabella was exhausted, but satisfied. She had made it through her first day without discovery. Thomas seemed pleased with her work, and the other boys had accepted her as one of them. She ate her simple meal of bread and stew in the servants' hall, listening to the chatter around her. His Grace seems different lately, one of the maids whispered to another. More distracted. Cook says he barely touched his dinner last night. Maybe he's thinking about taking a wife, the other maid replied. A man his age should be married with children by now. Isabella's ears perked up at this conversation. The Duke of Raven's Hollow was known throughout the county as a bachelor who showed little interest in marriage. At 32 he was considered quite the catch, but he had turned down every match proposed to him. I heard he was supposed to marry Lady Ashworth's daughter, one of the footmen chimed in, but she disappeared right before the engagement was to be announced. Isabella nearly choked on her stew. She had not realized her father had been planning to match her with the Duke. The irony of her situation struck her like a physical blow. She had fled an arranged marriage only to end up working for the man she was meant to marry. That night, Isabella lay on her narrow bed in the stable loft, staring up at the wooden beams above her head. The other stable boys snored around her, exhausted from their day's work. She had escaped one fate, only to stumble into another. But at least here she was free to be herself, even if that self was hidden beneath boys' clothes and a false name. Days passed in a blur of hard work and careful deception. Isabella learned the routines of the estate, the personalities of the horses, and the gossip of the servants. She kept her head down and her ears open, always alert for any sign that her disguise had been discovered. The Duke of Ravenshollow appeared in the stables regularly, checking on his horses and speaking with Thomas about breeding programs and training schedules. Isabella tried to make herself invisible during these visits, but she often felt his eyes on her. Once, she caught him watching her groom one of his favorite mares, a beautiful chestnut named Lady. His expression was thoughtful, almost puzzled, as if he were trying to solve a riddle. "You have a gentle hand with the horses," he said one morning, appearing beside Isabella's stall without warning. Isabella nearly jumped out of her skin. "Thank you, Your Grace. Lady seems particularly fond of you. She's usually wary of strangers." Isabella stroked the mare's neck, feeling the animal's trust in her touch. "Animals know when someone means them no harm, Your Grace." "Indeed they do." The Duke moved closer, and Isabella caught the scent of his cologne, something expensive and masculine that made her stomach flutter in a most unwomanly way. "Tell me, Isaac, do you ever miss your family?" The question caught Isabella off guard. "Sometimes, Your Grace. It must be difficult, being so far from home and everyone you know." There was something in his tone that made Isabella look up at him. His blue eyes held a warmth she had not expected, and for a moment she forgot to keep her voice low. "It is, Your Grace, but sometimes leaving home is the only way to find who you're truly meant to be." The Duke's eyebrows rose slightly at her response. Wise words for one so young. "How old are you, Isaac?" Isabella's mind raced. She needed to be old enough to work, but young enough to explain her smooth face and slender build. 18, Your Grace." 18. The Duke repeated the number slowly, as if testing it. The same age as Lady Isabella Ashworth would be, if she had not vanished into thin air. Isabella's blood turned to ice. She focused intently on Lady's mane, praying her face did not betray her panic. "I wouldn't know about that, Your Grace. I don't move in such fine circles." "No, I suppose you wouldn't." The Duke was quiet for a long moment. "Isaac, if someone you knew was in trouble, what would you do to help them?" "Whatever I could, Your Grace. Even if it meant putting myself at risk. Even if helping them meant going against your own interests." Isabella met his gaze steadily. "Yes, Your Grace. Some things are more important than personal gain." The Duke nodded slowly. "I believe you would." "Good day, Isaac." He walked away, leaving Isabella shaking in the stall. Did he know who she was? Was he testing her? She could not be sure, but something in his manner suggested he was playing a game whose rules she did not understand. That evening, Isabella was brushing down the horses for the night when she heard voices from outside the stable. She recognized the Duke's deep tones immediately, but the other voice was unfamiliar, harsh and unpleasant. "I tell you, Ravenshollow, she cannot have gone far," the stranger was saying. "A sheltered girl like Isabella Ashworth would never survive on her own. She'll turn up, and when she does, I'll make sure she understands the consequences of defying me." Isabella's heart clenched with fear. Lord Blackthorne had come looking for her. "Perhaps," the Duke replied coolly. "Lady Isabella had good reason to disappear. I understand you have quite a reputation with your wives, Blackthorne." "My wives were weak women who couldn't handle the discipline a proper household requires. Isabella will learn to be more obedient, I assure you." Isabella pressed herself against the stable wall, trying to control her breathing. The cruelty in Blackthorne's voice made her skin crawl. "And if she does not return willingly?" the Duke asked. "Then I'll drag her back myself. Her father owes me money, and our marriage contract is legally binding. She belongs to me whether she likes it or not." I see, and you believe she is somewhere in this area. The trail leads here. My men tracked her as far as your lands before losing her scent. If you're hiding her Raven's Hollow, I'll find out. I assure you, Lord Blackthorn, I am not hiding Lady Isabella Ashworth anywhere on my property. Isabella heard footsteps moving away from the stable, but she remained frozen against the wall for several minutes, her heart pounding. The Duke had not lied exactly, but he had not told the truth either. If he knew who she was, why had he not turned her over to Blackthorn? The next morning, Isabella was surprised to receive a summons to the Duke's study. She knocked nervously on the carved oak doors, her mind racing with possibilities. Had Blackthorn convinced him to give her up? Was her masquerade finally over? Enter, the Duke called. Isabella stepped into the room, keeping her eyes downcast in the manner of a proper servant. The Duke sat behind his desk, but this time he was not alone. A woman in elegant blue silk occupied one of the chairs facing him. She had silver hair and intelligent green eyes that seemed to see everything. "Isaac," the Duke said, "I would like you to meet my aunt, Lady Margaret Thornton. She has come to visit for a few weeks." Isabella bowed awkwardly. "My lady." Lady Margaret studied Isabella with the same intense gaze as her nephew. "How interesting. You know, Your Grace, this young man reminds me of someone, though I cannot quite place who." "Does he indeed?" The Duke's tone was carefully neutral. "Yes, something about the eyes, I think. And the way he holds his head, quite aristocratic for a stable boy." Isabella felt heat rise in her cheeks. Lady Margaret's scrutiny was even more unnerving than the Duke's. "Isaac has proven to be an excellent worker," the Duke said, "which is why I'm promoting him. From now on, you will work in the house as well as the stables. You'll help serve at meals and tend to any guests who might visit." Isabella's heart sank. Working in the house meant more exposure, more chances for someone to see through her disguise. But she could hardly refuse without arousing suspicion. "Thank you, Your Grace. I'm honored by your trust." "Excellent. Report to Mrs. Henderson, the housekeeper, this afternoon. She will explain your new duties." As Isabella turned to leave, Lady Margaret's voice stopped her. "Tell me, young man, do you have any family? Any sisters, perhaps?" Isabella's throat went dry. "No, my lady, I'm an only child." "How sad. I always think young men benefit from having sisters. It teaches them how to treat ladies with proper respect." "Yes, my lady." Isabella escaped from the study with her heart racing. Lady Margaret definitely suspected something, and her pointed comments about sisters and treating ladies with respect felt like warnings. But warnings about what? Mrs. Henderson, the housekeeper, was a stern woman with greying hair pulled back in a tight bun. She looked Isabella up and down with disapproval. "His Grace says you're to help with serving and general household duties. Can you carry a tray without dropping it?" "Yes, ma'am." "Can you keep your mouth shut about what you see and hear in this house?" "Yes, ma'am." "Good. The first rule of working in a great house is discretion. The family's business is not your business, and what happens within these walls stays within these walls. Understood?" "Yes, ma'am." Mrs. Henderson handed Isabella a crisp white shirt and black jacket. "Put these on. You'll need to look presentable if you're to serve the family and their guests. And for heaven's sake, do something about your hair. You look like you cut it with a knife in the dark." Isabella touched her shortened locks self-consciously. She had indeed cut her hair with a knife in the dark, but she could hardly admit that to the housekeeper. That evening, Isabella found herself serving dinner in the grand dining room. The Duke sat at the head of the long table with Lady Margaret to his right. Several other guests had joined them. including a couple Isabella recognized from her father's social circle. She kept her head down and prayed they would not look too closely at the servant bringing them their soup. "I heard the most distressing news today," one of the guests, Lady Pemberton, was saying. "Lord Ashworth's daughter has been missing for over a week now. The poor man is beside himself with worry." Isabella's hand trembled slightly as she set down Lady Margaret's soup bowl. "How terrible," Lady Margaret replied. "Do they have any idea what happened to her?" "Some say she ran away to avoid marrying Lord Blackthorne." "Can you imagine a young lady of good breeding behaving in such a scandalous manner?" "Perhaps," the Duke said quietly. "Lady Isabella had good reasons for her actions. Lord Blackthorne is not known for his kindness to women." "Still," Lady Pemberton insisted, "a young lady's duty is to obey her father and husband. Personal feelings should not enter into it." Isabella bit her tongue to keep from responding. The conversation continued around her as she served the remaining courses, each word feeling like a blade to her heart. These people spoke about her fate as if she were a piece of property to be bought and sold, not a human being with thoughts and feelings of her own. After dinner, Isabella was clearing the dishes when she overheard the Duke speaking quietly to his aunt in the drawing room.
"You know who she is, don't you?" Lady Margaret was saying.
"I have my suspicions. Adrian, you cannot keep her here indefinitely. Eventually, someone will recognize her. I know, but I cannot turn her over to Blackthorne, not knowing what he would do to her. So, what do you propose?" There was a long silence before the Duke answered. "I'm not sure yet, but I will not see an innocent young woman sacrificed to pay her father's debts." Isabella's heart swelled with gratitude and something else she dared not name. The Duke of Ravenshollow was protecting her, even though doing so could bring scandal down upon his house. Why would he take such a risk for someone he barely knew? Days turned into weeks, and Isabella settled into her dual role as stable hand and house servant. She learned the rhythms of the great house, the personalities of the other servants, and the habits of the family. The Duke treated her with the same distant kindness he showed all his servants, but sometimes she caught him watching her with those penetrating blue eyes, as if he were trying to read her very soul. Lady Margaret remained at the estate, claiming she enjoyed the country air, but Isabella suspected the older woman was studying her, looking for clues to confirm what she already knew. Despite this, Lady Margaret was kind to her, often asking about her well-being and whether she was happy in her work. "You know," Lady Margaret said one morning as Isabella was dusting the library, "you have the most unusual way of moving for a young man. Very graceful, almost like a dancer." Isabella's hand stilled on the bookshelf. "I've never been called graceful before, my lady." "Haven't you? How strange. I would have thought. But perhaps I'm mistaken." Lady Margaret picked up a book and pretended to read, but Isabella could feel her watching from the corner of her eye. The conversation was interrupted by a commotion in the front hall. Isabella heard raised voices and the sound of heavy boots on marble floors. Her blood turned to ice as she recognized one of the voices. "I know she's here, Ravenshollow." Lord Blackthorne's harsh tones echoed through the house. "My men saw a figure matching her description entering your lands over a month ago." Isabella dropped the duster and pressed herself against the library wall, her heart hammering so loudly she was sure everyone in the house could hear it. "Lord Blackthorne," the Duke's cool voice replied, "I have already told you that Lady Isabella is not on my property. Perhaps your men were mistaken. Don't play games with me. I have a legal right to that girl, and I will have her. If you're hiding her, I'll tear this place apart stone by stone until I find her." Lady Margaret rose from her chair and moved to the library door, closing it softly. "Come away from the wall, child," she whispered. "If you stay there, you'll be seen through the window." Isabella stared at the older woman in shock. Lady Margaret smiled sadly and took her hand. "Did you really think we didn't know? My dear girl, you have your mother's eyes and your father's stubborn chin. I've known who you were from the moment I saw you." "Please," Isabella whispered, her voice breaking. "Please don't let him take me." "Hush now. No one is going to take you anywhere against your will, but we must be very careful. Come. There's a passage behind this bookshelf that leads to the servants' stairs. You can hide in the old nursery until this unpleasant man leaves." Lady Margaret pressed something on the bookshelf, and a section swung inward to reveal a narrow corridor. Isabella had heard of such passages in old houses, but had never seen one. She squeezed through the opening just as the library door burst open. "What's the meaning of this intrusion?" Lady Margaret's voice was icy with aristocratic disdain. "I'm searching for a runaway girl," Blackthorn snarled, "and I'll search every room in this house if I have to." "You will do no such thing. This is a gentleman's house, not some common inn. If my nephew says the girl is not here, then she is not here." Isabella crept through the dark passage, feeling her way along the stone walls. She could hear Blackthorn's voice growing fainter as she climbed the hidden stairs. The passage emerged in what must have once been a nursery, judging by the child-sized furniture covered in dust sheets. She huddled in the corner behind an old rocking horse, trying to control her breathing. Through the floor, she could hear boots stomping through the house as Blackthorn conducted his search. Every sound made her flinch, expecting at any moment to hear her hiding place discovered. After what felt like hours, the house grew quiet again. Isabella remained in her hiding place, afraid to move. Finally, she heard soft footsteps on the hidden stairs, and the Duke's voice calling quietly, "Isabella? It's safe now, he's gone." Isabella emerged from behind the rocking horse, her legs shaking. The Duke stood in the doorway of the passage, his face grave. In the dim light filtering through the dusty windows, he looked like a hero from one of the romantic novels she had read in secret. "How long have you known?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper.
"From the first moment I saw you. You have your mother's grace, and your father's green eyes. But more than that, you carry yourself like someone born to privilege, not like a boy raised in poverty."
Isabella felt tears threatening to spill over. "Why didn't you turn me over to him? You could have collected a reward." The Duke stepped closer, his expression soft. "Because I could see the terror in your eyes every time his name was mentioned. Because I've heard what happened to his previous wives. Because no woman should be forced into marriage against her will, no matter what debts her father owes. But keeping me here puts you at risk. If anyone discovers what you've done, let me worry about that." The Duke reached out and gently touched her shortened hair. "Though I must say, you make a rather unconvincing boy. Your hands are too soft, your voice too musical, and you move like you're wearing silk instead of rough wool." Isabella felt heat rise in her cheeks at his touch. Standing so close to him in the dim nursery, she was acutely aware of how tall and broad-shouldered he was, how his presence seemed to fill the small space. The masculine scent of his cologne made her head spin. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now we need to find a permanent solution to your problem. Blackthorn won't give up easily, and your father's creditors will keep pressuring him to find you. There is no solution. I'm legally bound to marry him, and my father desperately needs the money," Blackthorn promised. The Duke was quiet for a long moment, his blue eyes studying her face in the dusty light. "There might be a way," he said finally, "but it would require a great deal of trust between us." "What do you mean?" Instead of answering directly, the Duke offered her his arm. "Come. We shouldn't linger here. The servants will be wondering where we've gone." They made their way back through the secret passage to the library, where Lady Margaret waited with tea and worried eyes. She embraced Isabella as soon as she emerged from behind the bookshelf. "My dear child, are you all right?" That dreadful man was stomping about like a bull in a china shop. "I'm fine, thanks to you both." Isabella sank into a chair, suddenly exhausted. "But I can't keep hiding forever. Eventually someone will recognize me, or father will be forced to tell Blackthorn where I am." "Perhaps not," the Duke said, settling into the chair across from her. "There is a way to make you legally unavailable for marriage to Blackthorn." Isabella looked up at him hopefully. "How? You could marry someone else first." The words hung in the air like a challenge. Isabella stared at the Duke, her heart beating so fast she thought it might burst from her chest. "But who would marry me? I have no dowry to offer, and my reputation is ruined by running away." The Duke leaned forward, his intense gaze fixed on her face. "I would." Isabella's world tilted on its axis. "You... what?" "I'm proposing marriage, Isabella, a real marriage, not just a convenience to thwart Blackthorn." Lady Margaret clapped her hands together in delight. "Oh, how perfect. Adrian, you clever boy, why didn't I think of that?" Isabella's mind reeled. "But you don't even know me, not really. And I'm not. I mean, I can't offer you anything a duke should want in a wife. Ain't you?" The Duke's voice was gentle. "You're brave enough to sacrifice everything for your freedom. You're kind to animals and servants alike. You work hard without complaint and face danger with courage. You speak intelligently about things that matter and show compassion for those less fortunate. What more could I want in a wife?" But Isabella struggled to find words. "This is all so sudden. Just yesterday I was Isaac the stable boy, and now you're proposing marriage. I don't understand any of this." The Duke rose from his chair and moved to kneel beside hers, taking her hands in his larger ones. "Then let me explain. I've been watching you for weeks. Isabella, at first I was simply curious about the young woman brave enough to disguise herself as a boy and seek work in my stables. But as I got to know you, even in your disguise, I found myself drawn to you." Isabella's breath caught in her throat. "Drawn to me? Your spirit, your determination, your gentle heart, the way you care for the horses and treat the other servants with respect, the intelligence in your eyes when you think no one is watching. I've never met a woman like you. But you could have anyone. Any duke's daughter or earl's niece in England would be honored to marry you. I don't want any duke's daughter or earl's niece. I want you." His thumb traced gently over her knuckles. "If you'll have me." Isabella looked into his blue eyes and saw something there that made her heart flutter. Was it possible that this powerful, handsome man had truly fallen in love with her while she worked in his stables? The idea seemed too wonderful to believe. "I need time to think," she whispered. "Of course, this is not a decision to be made lightly." The Duke rose and stepped back, giving her space. "But don't take too long. Blackthorn will return, and next time he might not be so easily turned away." That night, Isabella lay in her narrow bed in the stable loft, staring up at the rafters. The other stable boys slept peacefully around her, unaware that their fellow worker was actually a lady being courted by a duke. The situation would have been laughable if it weren't so serious. Did she love Adrian Thornton, Duke of Ravenshollow? The question tormented her through the long hours of darkness. She certainly felt something for him, something that made her pulse race when he looked at her and her stomach flutter when he spoke her name. But was it love or merely gratitude for his protection? And what kind of marriage would it be? She knew nothing about being a duchess, nothing about running a great house or moving in the highest circles of society. She had spent the last month pretending to be a stable boy. For heaven's sake, how could she possibly transform herself into a woman worthy of a duke? But then she thought of Lord Blackthorn's cruel voice and cold eyes, and she shuddered. Whatever challenges marriage to the duke might bring, they could not be worse than a lifetime of abuse at Blackthorn's hands. The next morning, Isabella was grooming Lady when the duke appeared at the stall door. He looked as if he had slept as poorly as she had, with dark circles under his eyes and lines of strain around his mouth. "Have you given any more thought to my proposal?" he asked, without preamble. Isabella set down the brush and turned to face him. "I have thought of little else, but I have questions." "Ask them. If we marry, would it be, that is, would you expect?" Isabella felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment. How did one ask such delicate questions? The Duke's expression softened. "Would I expect you to share my bed? Is that what you're asking?" Isabella nodded, unable to speak. "Only if and when you wanted to." "I would never force myself on you, Isabella. If you married me tomorrow, you could have your own chambers and your own life. I would ask nothing of you that you weren't ready to give freely." The knot of anxiety in Isabella's chest loosened slightly. "And my father's debts? Would marrying you solve that problem? I would settle your father's accounts as part of the marriage settlement. He would no longer be beholden to Blackthorn." "You would do that, even though father has treated me so poorly?" "I would do it for you, because I know you love him, despite his faults, and his ruin would cause you pain." Isabella studied the Duke's face, looking for any sign of deception or calculation, but his blue eyes held only sincerity and something else that made her heart skip. "There's something else," she said quietly. "I don't know how to be a duchess. I can muck stalls and groom horses, but I know nothing about running a household or entertaining important guests." The Duke smiled, the first genuine smile she had seen from him in days. "My Aunt Margaret would be delighted to teach you everything you need to know. And besides, you've been observing the household for weeks now. You probably know more than you realize." Isabella took a deep breath, her decision crystallizing in her mind. "Yes," she said simply. "Yes? Yes, I'll marry you? If you're certain this is what you want?" The Duke's face lit up with joy, and suddenly Isabella found herself swept into his arms, her feet leaving the ground as he spun her around the stall. Lady whinnied in surprise, and the other horses poked their heads over their stall doors to see what the commotion was about. "When?" Isabella asked breathlessly, when he set her down. "As soon as possible. I'll send for the Archbishop's special license today. We can be married by the end of the week." "So soon?" "The sooner you're legally my wife, the sooner you'll be safe from Blackthorn." The Duke cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs tracing gently over her cheekbones. "And the sooner I can stop pretending I don't want to kiss you." Isabella's breath caught. "You want to kiss me?" "I've wanted to kiss you since the first day you walked into my study, pretending to be Isaac Miller. Even dressed as a boy with dirt on your face, you were the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen." Isabella felt tears prick her eyes. No one had ever called her beautiful before. Her father had always compared her unfavorably to her deceased mother, and Lord Blackthorn had made it clear he was marrying her for her family connections, not her looks. "You don't have to say such things," she whispered. "I'm not saying them because I have to. I'm saying them because they're true." The Duke leaned closer, his lips almost touching hers. "May I?" Isabella nodded, her heart hammering in her chest. The Duke's lips touched hers gently, softly, as if she were made of the finest porcelain. It was her first kiss, and it was everything she had dreamed it might be, sweet and tender and full of promise. When they broke apart, Isabella felt dizzy with emotion. The Duke rested his forehead against hers, his breathing slightly unsteady. "I love you, Isabella Ashworth," he said quietly. "I want you to know that before we marry, this isn't just about saving you from Blackthorn. I love your courage and your kindness, and the way you bite your lip when you're thinking. I love how you gentle the most difficult horses, and how you treat the lowliest scullery maid with the same respect you'd show a queen." Isabella's heart overflowed with joy. "I love you too," she whispered, the words feeling strange and wonderful on her lips. "I think I started falling in love with you that first day when you could have exposed me, but didn't, when you chose to protect me instead of turning me away." The Duke kissed her again, longer this time, with more passion. Isabella felt as if she were floating, as if nothing in the world existed except this moment and this man and the love growing between them. They were interrupted by the sound of someone clearing their throat. They sprang apart to find Thomas, the head groom, standing at the entrance to the stall with an amused expression on his weathered face. "Begging your pardon, your grace, but young Isaac here has work to do, and unless I'm very much mistaken, he's got some explaining to do as well." The Duke laughed, a sound of pure happiness that made Isabella's heart soar. "Indeed he does, Thomas, or rather, she does. Allow me to introduce you to Lady Isabella Ashworth, my future wife." Thomas's eyes widened, but he recovered quickly and swept off his cap in a respectful bow. "My lady, well, that explains a few things. I was wondering why the best stable hand I'd ever hired had hands softer than my wife's, and jumped like a startled rabbit every time someone spoke loudly." Isabella felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment. "You knew?" "I suspected, but His Grace's secret was his own to keep, and you did good work regardless of what you were hiding under those boys' clothes." The next few days passed in a whirlwind of activity. Lady Margaret took charge of preparing Isabella for her transformation from stable boy to duchess, while the Duke handled the legal arrangements and fended off increasingly desperate messages from Lord Ashworth, demanding to know his daughter's whereabouts. "We'll tell him after the wedding," the Duke decided. "Once you're safely married to me, he can't force you to honor the contract with Blackthorn." Isabella's transformation was nothing short of miraculous. Lady Margaret produced gowns that had belonged to the Duke's mother, taking them in to fit Isabella's slender figure. Her hair, still short from her masculine disguise, was styled in the latest fashion with soft curls framing her face. Cosmetics brought out the green of her eyes and the pink of her lips. When Isabella looked at herself in the mirror on her wedding morning, she barely recognized the elegant young woman staring back at her. Gone was Isaac, the stable boy with his dirt-smudged face and rough clothes. In his place stood Lady Isabella Ashworth, soon to be the Duchess of Ravenshollow. The wedding took place in the estate's private chapel, with only Lady Margaret, Thomas, Mrs. Henderson, and a few other trusted servants as witnesses. Isabella wore a gown of ivory silk with delicate pearl embroidery, her mother's jewelry glittering at her throat and ears. The Duke wore his dress uniform, looking every inch the powerful nobleman he was. As they stood before the altar, exchanging vows that would bind them together for life, Isabella marveled at the turn her life had taken. Just 2 months ago, she had been a desperate girl fleeing an unwanted marriage. Now she was pledging her heart to a man she loved with every fibre of her being. "I, Adrian Charles Thornton, take thee, Isabella Rose Ashworth, to be my wedded wife," the Duke said, his voice strong and clear. "To have and to hold from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, till death do us part." When it came time for Isabella to speak her vows, her voice trembled with emotion. "I, Isabella Rose Ashworth, take thee, Adrian Charles Thornton, to be my wedded husband, to have and hold from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love, cherish, and obey, till death do us part. The words, love, cherish, and obey took on new meaning as she spoke them. This was not the forced obedience Blackthorn would have demanded, but a willing partnership with a man who had already proven his love and respect for her. When the chaplain pronounced them husband and wife, the Duke lifted Isabella's veil and kissed her with such tenderness that tears sprang to her eyes. They were married. She was safe, and more than that, she was loved. The wedding breakfast was a quiet affair, but Isabella had never been happier. She sat beside her new husband, still hardly believing that the handsome Duke was now hers. Lady Margaret regaled them with stories of the Duke's childhood, painting a picture of a serious boy who had grown into a man of honor and integrity. He once rescued a litter of puppies from a flooding stream, Lady Margaret said, smiling fondly at her nephew. Ruined his best jacket and caught a terrible cold, but he couldn't bear to let them drown. Aunt Margaret, the Duke protested, but Isabella could see he was pleased by the story. It's true, he's always had a soft heart for creatures in distress. It's no wonder he couldn't resist helping a certain young lady in disguise. Isabella reached under the table and squeezed her husband's hand. He squeezed back, his thumb tracing patterns on her palm that made her pulse quicken. Their wedding night was everything Isabella had hoped for, and more. The Duke was patient and gentle, taking time to ease her nervousness with soft kisses and whispered endearments. When they finally came together as husband and wife, it was with a passion and tenderness that left Isabella breathless with wonder. Afterward, as they lay entwined in the Duke's great bed, Isabella traced patterns on his chest with her fingertip. "I can hardly believe this is real," she murmured. "It's real," the Duke assured her, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "You're my wife, my Duchess, and the love of my life. What will happen when people find out who I really am? When they learn that the Duke of Ravenshollow married a runaway girl who disguised herself as a stable boy?" The Duke chuckled, the sound rumbling through his chest. "Let them talk. I married the bravest, most resourceful woman in England. If anyone has a problem with that, they can answer to me." Isabella smiled against his skin, feeling safe and cherished in a way she had never experienced before. Whatever challenges lay ahead, she would face them with this remarkable man by her side. They were interrupted by a commotion in the courtyard below. The Duke rose and went to the window, his expression darkening as he looked down. "What is it?" Isabella asked, pulling the sheet up to cover herself. "Your father, and he's brought Blackthorn with him." Isabella's blood turned to ice. "They found us, so it would seem." The Duke reached for his dressing gown, his jaw set in determined lines. "But it doesn't matter now. You're legally my wife, and there's nothing either of them can do about it." Isabella dressed quickly in one of her new gowns, her hands shaking as she tried to fasten the buttons. The Duke helped her, his touch steadying her nerves. "Remember," he said softly, "you're not powerless anymore. You're the Duchess of Ravenshollow, and I will not let anyone hurt you." They made their way downstairs to find the entrance hall filled with tension. Lord Ashworth stood near the door, his face haggard and desperate. Beside him, Lord Blackthorn radiated barely controlled fury. Lady Margaret faced them both with regal composure, clearly having been holding them at bay until the Duke arrived. "Isabella," Lord Ashworth cried when he saw her, "thank God you're safe. Come, we must leave immediately. Lord Blackthorn has been most patient, but the wedding must take place without further delay." "I'm afraid that's impossible, Father," Isabella said, surprised by the steadiness of her own voice. "I'm already married." The silence that followed was deafening. Lord Ashworth stared at his daughter in shock, while Blackthorn's face turned purple with rage. "Married? Lord Ashworth gasped. To whom? The Duke stepped forward and placed a protective arm around Isabella's waist. To me, Lady Isabella is now my wife and the Duchess of Ravenshollow. This is impossible, Blackthorn snarled. She was contracted to marry me. The agreement is legally binding. Was legally binding, the Duke corrected coldly. A woman cannot be bound to marry one man when she is already wed to another. The contract is void. Blackthorn's hand moved to his sword hilt, and Isabella felt the Duke tense beside her. You had no right to interfere. She belongs to me. She belongs to no one but herself, the Duke replied, his voice deadly quiet. And she chose to marry me of her own free will. Free will? Lord Ashworth looked between his daughter and the Duke in confusion. Isabella, how did you even meet His Grace? You've been missing for weeks. Isabella lifted her chin, drawing on the confidence her new position gave her. I've been here, Father, working in His Grace's stables under an assumed name. The revelation hit Lord Ashworth like a physical blow. Working in the stables, like a common servant, like someone determined to control her own destiny. Isabella replied firmly, someone who refused to be sold to pay her father's gambling debts. Lord Ashworth flinched at the harsh words, but Isabella felt no satisfaction in causing him pain. He was still her father, despite his failings. Blackthorn stepped forward menacingly. This farce of a marriage can be annulled. The girl was clearly coerced or seduced. No lady of breeding would willingly work as a servant. Careful, Blackthorn, the Duke warned, his voice dropping to a dangerous level. You're speaking of my wife, and I'll remind you that you're a guest in my house, though not a welcome one. Guest? Blackthorn laughed harshly. I'm here to collect what's mine. If you think I'll simply walk away and forfeit the money I've already paid. What money? The Duke interrupted. You've paid nothing to Lord Ashworth. The marriage contract specified payment upon completion of the ceremony. Since there was no ceremony, there is no debt. Isabella looked at her father in surprise. Is that true? Lord Ashworth's face crumpled with shame. I may have misled Lord Blackthorn about the timing of certain payments. You mean you lied? Isabella said quietly. You told him you'd already received money you never got, just to keep him interested in the match. The full scope of her father's deception became clear. He had promised her to Blackthorn based on lies and desperation, willing to sacrifice his daughter's happiness for the mere possibility of financial relief. This changes nothing. Blackthorn roared. I still have a claim on the girl. I've spent considerable time and effort pursuing this match. Your only claim, the Duke said coldly, was based on a contract that never legally existed. Lord Ashworth had no right to promise you something he couldn't deliver, and now the matter is moot. As Lady Isabella is my wife. Blackthorn's face contorted with rage, and Isabella saw murder in his eyes. You think your title protects you, Ravenshollow? I'll see you ruined for this. I'll make sure everyone knows how the great Duke of Ravenshollow had to steal another man's bride, because no decent woman would have him willingly. The Duke's expression didn't change, but Isabella felt the tension coil in his body like a spring ready to snap. You're welcome to try. But I should warn you that spreading lies about my wife's character or my own will result in legal action, and I have considerably more resources at my disposal than they do. The threat hung in the air like a blade. Blackthorn was powerful in his own right, but he was no match for a duke with the full weight of the English aristocracy behind him. Father, Isabella said, turning to Lord Ashworth, I'm sorry things ended this way, but I couldn't marry a man who would have made my life a misery. Surely you can understand that. Lord Ashworth looked at his daughter with eyes full of regret and sorrow. I only wanted to secure your future. Isabella, the estate is failing, and I thought, I thought this was the only way. There are other ways, the Duke interjected. As Isabella's husband, I'm prepared to discuss a reasonable settlement of your legitimate debts. Not because I owe you anything, but because my wife loves you despite everything. Isabella felt tears prick her eyes at her husband's generosity. Even now, faced with the man who had tried to sell her like a piece of property, he was willing to help because he knew it would make her happy. Lord Ashworth stared at the Duke in amazement. You would do that? Even after what I've done? I would do it for Isabella. She has a forgiving heart, and I won't see her suffer because of choices made before we met. Blackthorn watched this exchange with growing fury. This is all very touching, but it doesn't solve my problem. I've wasted months pursuing this match, and I need a wife. If I can't have Isabella, then Ashworth must provide suitable compensation for my time and trouble. You'll get nothing from me, Lord Ashworth said, some of his old pride reasserting itself. If anything, you owe me compensation for the distress you've caused my daughter with your threats and intimidation. Isabella admired her father's sudden show of backbone, but she could see it only enraged Blackthorn further. The man's hand tightened on his sword hilt, and she feared he might actually draw the weapon. Enough, the Duke said firmly. Lord Blackthorn, you will leave my estate immediately. You have no business here, and your presence is distressing my wife. I'll leave when I'm ready to leave, Blackthorn snarled, and not before. Actually came a new voice from the doorway. You'll leave now. Everyone turned to see Thomas standing in the entrance, flanked by 6 of the Duke's largest groundskeepers. All of them looked ready for trouble, and Isabella noticed that several carried the tools of their trade in a way that suggested they could be used as weapons, if necessary. The Duke smiled grimly. As I said, Lord Blackthorn, you're not a welcome guest. These men will be happy to escort you from the premises if you're unable to find your own way out. Blackthorn looked around the hall, taking in the determined faces surrounding him. He was outnumbered and on hostile ground, with no legal standing to support his position. But the rage in his eyes promised that this was not over. This isn't finished, Ravenshollow, he said through gritted teeth. No one makes a fool of Lord Blackthorn and walks away unscathed. Is that a threat? The Duke asked mildly. It's a promise. Blackthorn spun on his heel and stalked toward the door, pausing only to glare at Isabella with naked hatred. Enjoy your moment of victory, girl. It won't last forever. Isabella shuddered at the venom in his voice, but her husband's arm tightened protectively around her waist. Actually, the Duke said conversationally, threatening a duchess is considered an act of treason. Thomas, please make note of Lord Blackthorn's exact words. I'm sure the magistrate will find them interesting. Blackthorn's face went white as the implications sank in. Threatening a member of the royal family was indeed treason, punishable by death. He opened his mouth as if to speak, then thought better of it and stormed out of the hall. The tension in the room eased noticeably once Blackthorn was gone. Lord Ashworth sank into a chair, looking older than his years. Isabella, can you ever forgive me? I was desperate, and I thought I was doing what was best for you. Isabella went to her father and knelt beside his chair, taking his weathered hands in her smooth ones. I forgive you, father, but promise me you'll never try to control my life again. I'm a married woman now, and I must make my own decisions. I promise, Lord Ashworth whispered, tears streaming down his cheeks. I'm so sorry, my dear girl. So very sorry. The Duke approached them, his expression softening with compassion. Lord Ashworth, I meant what I said about helping with your debts, but there will be conditions. You must stop gambling, and you must allow Isabella to have a say in any decisions that affect her inheritance. Lord Ashworth nodded eagerly. Yes, of course, anything you think best. Your Grace. Over the following days, the Duke was as good as his word. He paid off Lord Ashworth's most pressing debts and arranged for a modest annual income that would allow him to maintain his estate without resorting to desperate measures. In return, Lord Ashworth signed documents giving Isabella control over her mother's inheritance, which had been held in trust since her death. Isabella was amazed to discover that her mother had left her a considerable fortune in jewelry and investments. "I never knew," she told her husband as they reviewed the documents in his study. "Father always said there was nothing left." "He probably didn't want to tempt himself with money he couldn't touch," the Duke replied diplomatically. "But now it's yours to do with as you please." Isabella looked at the papers spread across the desk, representations of a freedom she had never known she possessed. "I want to use some of it to improve conditions for the servants and tenants, and perhaps we could establish a fund to help other young women who find themselves in situations like mine." The Duke smiled and pulled her into his arms. "Have I mentioned lately that I love your generous heart?" "Only every day," Isabella replied, standing on her toes to kiss him. "And I love yours just as much." Their happiness was threatened only once more, when word reached them that Lord Blackthorne had been spreading vicious rumours about their marriage throughout London society. He claimed that Isabella had been the Duke's mistress before their wedding, that she had been pregnant with another man's child, and that the Duke had only married her to avoid scandal. "Let him talk," Isabella said, when her husband showed her the letter detailing the gossip. "Anyone who knows us will see the lies for what they are." "It's not that simple," the Duke replied grimly. "Reputation is everything in our world. These rumors could cause real damage to both of us." But Isabella had underestimated the loyalty of those who had come to know her during her time as Isaac the stable boy. Thomas wrote letters to his counterparts at other great estates, telling the true story of the brave young woman who had worked alongside them. Mrs. Henderson shared the tale with the network of housekeepers who managed England's finest homes. Even the other stable boys, who had accepted Isaac as one of their own, spread word of their former colleagues' courage and determination. The true story of the Duke of Ravenshollow's romantic marriage to a woman brave enough to disguise herself as a stable boy to escape a cruel fate captured the imagination of society. Instead of being scandalized, people were charmed by the tale. Within a month, Isabella found herself something of a romantic heroine, with young ladies copying her hairstyle and poets writing verses about her courage. "I never expected this," Isabella confessed to Lady Margaret as they prepared for their first major social event as a married couple. "I thought people would be horrified." "People love a good love story, my dear," Lady Margaret replied, adjusting Isabella's tiara, "especially one where true love triumphs over greed and cruelty. You and Adrian have given them something to believe in." The ball at the Duke of Wellington's mansion was Isabella's first real test as the Duchess of Ravenshollow. She had learned to dance properly under Lady Margaret's tutelage, studied the intricate rules of precedence and protocol, and practiced making polite conversation about topics that would interest the ton. But nothing could have prepared her for the moment when she and the Duke were announced at the top of the grand staircase. Hundreds of faces turned toward them, and Isabella felt her knees go weak. This was it, the moment when society would either accept her or cut her dead. The Duke squeezed her hand reassuringly. "Smile," he whispered. "You're the most beautiful woman in the room, and you're mine." Isabella lifted her chin and smiled, drawing on the courage that had carried her through her masquerade as Isaac Miller. As they descended the stairs, she was amazed to see approval rather than censure in the faces watching them. Women nodded and smiled, while men bowed respectfully to the Duke and his new Duchess. The evening was a triumph. Isabella found herself surrounded by well-wishers eager to hear her story firsthand. She told it simply and honestly, emphasizing her gratitude for her husband's protection and kindness. By the end of the night, even the most rigid sticklers for propriety were charmed by her grace and modesty. "You see," the Duke said as they rode home in their carriage, "I told you they would love you." "Not all of them," Isabella replied, thinking of the few cold shoulders she had received. "But enough. The ones who matter," the Duke corrected. "The others will come around eventually, and if they don't, their opinion isn't worth having." Lord Blackthorn made one final attempt at revenge, challenging the Duke to a duel over what he called the theft of my intended bride. But the challenge was laughed out of every gentleman's club in London. Isabella was clearly happy in her marriage, and Blackthorn's own reputation for cruelty to women had made him something of a pariah in polite society. 6 months after their wedding, Isabella stood in the same stable where she had first met her husband, watching him gentle a particularly spirited stallion. She was no longer the desperate girl who had fled her father's house in boy's clothing. She was the Duchess of Ravenshollow, secure in her position and beloved by her husband. "You ever miss it?" the Duke asked, noticing her thoughtful expression. The simplicity of being Isaac Miller? Isabella considered the question seriously. "Sometimes I miss the freedom of it. The feeling that I could go anywhere and be anyone. But I wouldn't trade what we have for all the freedom in the world." The Duke abandoned the stallion and came to her, pulling her into his arms, despite the risk to her elegant day dress. "And what do we have, Your Grace?" Isabella smiled up at him, her heart full of love and gratitude for the man who had seen through her disguise to the woman beneath. "We have everything that matters: love, trust, partnership, a future we're building together." "Indeed we do." The Duke kissed her softly, tasting of mint and promise, "though I must say I rather enjoy having you in silk and lace instead of rough wool and leather boots." "Do you?" Isabella laughed, remembering her clumsy attempts to walk like a boy. "Even though I make a terrible stable hand." "You made an excellent stable hand, but you make an even better duchess, and most importantly, you make a perfect wife." Isabella thought of all the twists and turns that had brought her to this moment. Her father's debts, her desperate flight, her masquerade as Isaac Miller, and finally her marriage to the man she loved. It had been a journey filled with danger and uncertainty, but it had led her to happiness beyond her wildest dreams. "I love you, Adrian Thornton," she said, using his full name as she had on their wedding day. "And I love you, Isabella Thornton, Duchess of Ravenshollow, formerly Isaac Miller, stable boy extraordinaire." They laughed together in the warm afternoon sunlight, surrounded by the gentle sounds of horses and the promise of a future built on love, trust, and the courage to be true to oneself. Isabella had disguised herself as a boy to escape an unwanted marriage, but in doing so she had found the greatest love of her life, and the Duke, who had seen through her disguise from the very beginning, had chosen to protect and cherish the brave young woman beneath the borrowed clothes and shortened hair. In the end, love had triumphed over duty, courage over convention, and truth over deception. Lady Isabella Ashworth had found her freedom not in running away, but in finding a man worthy of her trust, and the Duke of Ravenshollow had found his perfect match, not in a drawing room or ballroom, but in his own stables, disguised as a boy with frightened eyes and a brave heart. Their love story would be told and retold for generations, inspiring other young women to have courage in the face of impossible odds, and reminding society that true love could be found in the most unexpected places. But for Isabella and Adrian, the greatest triumph was not in the telling of their story, but in the living of it, day by day, choice by choice, always together.